Now, as you continue to negotiate with your supervisor and add value at your work, my hope is that through the years, you're always optimizing with the right seat on the bus in your particular vocational vehicle. And you're continually kind of tweaking the dials on your role description to live into that sweet spot of your vocation zone. Now, as you do that, you're going to ultimately come to what we call a risk to go moment. When I think of the time and the moment where it's time to do kind of the kind of change that it's a change your what, and you've got to actually find or add a complete new vehicle, the hardest thing to do is to actually walk away from a really, really good vocational vehicle to take a risk to go to one that you think is better. And we call that the risk to go moment. Now, one of the pictures that I always have in mind, and I'm grateful for a mentor, Prof. Howard Hendricks, who would draw a life funnel at times when he was mentoring a small group of us in graduate school. And I love that kind of this picture of a funnel that I want to offer to you. You'll see it in our resources, but let me review it again. At the top of this life funnel, Prof. Hendricks would draw all these X's, right? And he would write next to 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 X's at the top of this whiteboard funnel. He'd write the word can do. And he would say, these are all the things that you can do in life. And then at the bottom of the funnel, where there was only room for one X, he'd draw a singular X, he'd circle it, and then he'd put the words next to that, must do, must do. This is the one thing you must do for God. And he would encourage us to spend all of our lives finding and focusing our life on the one thing that we must do for God. And the way that I think about these risk to go moments is that through life, we're editing and we're filtering and we're discerning through all the things we can do with our vocational calling, and we make steps down that funnel, getting clearer and clearer and clearer, and moving and marching toward that one thing we must do. Now, Prof would say these things. He'd say, the secret to concentration is elimination. He'd say, what are you saying no to? He'd warn us. He'd say the more success that you have and the more people that you know and the more resources that you have, he'd say the more options are going to line the top of your life funnel. And most opportunities that will come your way are actually distractions in disguise. Find that one thing you must do. One of my favorite lines he would ask and kind of charge us with is, what has God been preparing you to do next? Find that one thing. It was that picture in my mind when 3 or 4 or 5 times in my life, I just left a really, really good vocational vehicle to try to find one even better. Obviously, what happens to most people in that moment is they fear. They fear leaving that place. They're scared to lose that really good income. They're scared to lose that good reputation that they have in their accomplishments inside of that particular vocational vehicle. Maybe they're afraid to kind of reset the relationships in their life. There's all kinds of things that can hold us back. The big question is, how do you in the end make that big decision to make that leap? Well, one of the tools that we have for you is, we call it the risk to go decision matrix. It's a very simple take on a decision-making matrix, but if you haven't seen this before, you might have missed the opportunity to have a really powerful tool when it comes to your own risk to go moment. Let me walk you through it, and you can download the tool to follow along. But I've got a version here that we can see. In the risk to go decision matrix, what we're doing is we're at that moment in time where we're evaluating several different vocational options. It's that classic fork in the road vocationally. Do I stay where I am or do I go? And if I do go and I have multiple options, what's the best option? So on our particular tool that we're going to give you, you have option A, B, C, and D. You have a 4-part decision-making matrix at the top. Now, you may only have option A and B. That's fine. But if you have 3 or 4 options, you can put them in. So at the top here, we have different vocational options we might write on here. A would be stay at my current job. B would be make a change to another vocational vehicle, go to a different company, go to a different ministry. Now, what we have on the left are different criteria or different filters. And we're going to give you some ideas in the toolbox. One of the things we want to think through are aspects of our calling and our identity. So, and if you go through the unique experience, we actually take every tool in our unique experience. We take all the tools in the ability circle, all the tools in the passion circle, all the tools in the context circle, and we make a criteria out of them. That's 18 criteria alone. Then we also have your personal vision frame. So you can take your life call statement, your life core statement, and those become additional criteria. So for this example, let's say that I have a sense of what my life call is. And let's say that I know a couple values in my life. So I'll just call it value number 1 and value number 2. Let's take into consideration an essential filter in your life. For example, let's say you've gone through a divorce and you're bound to basically a 50-mile area because you want to stay in the region to raise your kids. So we call this an essential filter, and I'm going to put down here essential number 1. Now, the way you use a risk-to-go decision matrix in Unique is we use these little indicator dots or indicator lights, and we have a simple little technique that we fill in every dot here for each of our criteria and for each of our vocational options with either a green light, yellow light, or red light. And the key here is not to overthink it, trust the process. It can be very powerful. A green light just says, you know what, there's really good alignment between my life call or this essential and this vocational option. A yellow light says, yeah, it kind of fits. It's not clearly great and it's not clearly bad. It's just like, yeah, it's kind of in the middle. And a red light is like, no, that's not a fit at all. Like that goes against this value or this essential, whatever it is that we're evaluating. So what we can do in this case, let's say we're looking at option A and option B, and I think back to the years where, am I going to be an engineer or am I going to go into ministry and be a pastor? And that's a pretty big change to my what. So, I might look at option A as stay an engineer, and I think, based on my life call statement, that's, just doesn't get me excited. I mean, it's kind of in the middle there. It's close to being red, but I'll just call it yellow. But boy, if I go into the ministry, that's just completely aligned to what I feel God's called me to do in life. And what you can do is go through and mark every dot on your decision-making matrix, yellow, green, or red. So I go down here and I look at the value system. And I go, wow, that decision, value number 1 is learning for me. And if I stay in this job, I just don't have the opportunity to spend time learning as much as I want to. But in this job, I will. And that's an actual value for me. And several years ago when I moved a job, I literally negotiated 4 weeks of study leave, paid study leave, so that I could protect and live into my value for learning. And you might come down here and value 2 stays green over here, but the value in this particular vocation is not quite as lit up as green, and you're not quite sure. And as you come down here, essential number 1, maybe that stays yellow, but you come to this option of staying in engineering, you just hit a red part. Like, this essential in my life. This would require me to move outside of this 50-mile radius in this particular category in my life. I just don't feel like I can violate. Now the goal is to list all of the most important criteria and filters for you down here, and then to just quickly go through and mark every potential vocational option, green, yellow, or red. And what I've done, just to fast forward this process, is I've built out the entire matrix, kind of show you here. And so this is an example of having thought through a full set of criteria and filters. And I went ahead and I've actually evaluated 4 different vocational options. This actually simulates a life planning experience I had about 4 years ago as I was considering kind of what the next 3 years would look like. So this actually mimics an exact thing that I did in my own life planning journey. Now what you do at the end, after you look at all these criteria, is you do a summary down here at the bottom. You can see in column A here, this option, there's an equal number of green and yellow indicators. And what we do is we tend to kind of round down a little bit. So even though there's equal green and yellow, I summarize it as a yellow. Obviously, we're looking for what is your best green option on your summary. A lot of times when there's a red light, we say red is dead. And many times a red will just roll up down here as a summary to be red. So even though I have several greens in vocational option B, I had 3 reds. And if I ever have 2 or 3 reds on a vocational decision-making matrix, I'm just going to fill in the summary as red. Red is dead. Now, vocational option C, you can see all the options were green except there were a couple of yellows. That's typically a pretty amazing alignment to all the key criteria and filters in your life. And so this one drops down to a green. And then you can see one here where there's kind of an equal number of greens and yellows. I could have put red here, and this one I just put yellow to contrast it. This one was clearly red. This would be a red or yellow. And I can't tell you how many times I've been coaching somebody and they go through a simple decision-making matrix like this. You can design a quick napkin sketch decision-making matrix for anything. Just find the 3 or 4 key criteria, put your options out there, and do a little green, yellow, red on it. I was recently just working with somebody. I was working with a medical doctor who was trying to decide, is it time to leave the military and go into private practice, or do they stay in their current position so that they can get their 20-year retirement income? Literally, all we needed to articulate were 3 of their core values. And with 3 core values and a binary option for vocational decision making, they're able to totally clarify what their next step should be. This particular doctor had been wrestling for 18 months around this decision, and literally in a 15-minute decision-making matrix, the pathway became abundantly clear. Now, this is the single most powerful tool I know to evaluate your risk to go moment. It's obviously, its value is tied to how well you've thought through your criteria and your filters. Now, at the end of the day, when it does come time to make that risk, I want to just give you a few reminders. Every time I've taken a risk to go moment, I've had this quote in my mind, and I remind myself all the time, ships are safe in harbor, but that's not what ships are for. Don't make your life call decision based on safety. Don't risk kind of living in the comfort zone of your entire life. Head out there to the vast and open seas. Another thing to remember is something that Mark Twain said. Mark Twain said, 20 years from now, we will often not regret what we did. We will most likely regret what we didn't do. And so we want to kind of pay attention to those God hunches and the Holy Spirit inside of us, prompting us, those echoes in the soul. What do you secretly believe you'd be great at but never told anybody? What has God been preparing you to do next? And you want to kind of build that courage to take that step of faith and that calculated risk. Finally, you're really never going to ever eliminate fear, but it's important to cut fear down to size. How do you do that? Well, often you have to think about some of the worst case scenarios. Oftentimes, the fear of leaving a place, it gets exaggerated and exaggerated and exaggerated. And we start thinking of and worrying about all of the possible things that could happen. Ultimately, you're not ready to take a risk to go until you get to this point, where you would rather take the risk and fail than stay where you are and wonder what if. What really is going to be the bigger regret in your life? For me, every time I took a risk to go moment, from my first one when I was 23 years old to the several that I've taken over the last several decades, every time I got to a point where I said I would much rather fail trying to step into the vocation zone, trying to find that and live into that one thing, that one must do that God's given me to do. And every time I did, in my particular case, I found myself kind of soaring to new heights. I found kind of a lift beneath my wings that I literally never had experienced in my life. And I never would have known that if it wasn't for that risk to go moment and that risk to go opportunity. So while you have a tool like this to really kind of get your head on straight and think through it, ultimately there's always a step of faith. And I want to encourage you, as you work through all the tools in this course, God is not trying to keep His will from you. Most of the time when there's a deep hunch and you've worked through all these tools and all these questions and all these conversations, God is usually prompting you to take that risk. And I want to encourage you to take it. Don't live the rest of your life asking, what if, what if, what if? Life is too short not to step into the one thing that only you can do.